This screencast introduces some of the issues in 1 John 5 verses 1 to 12 that might help you with translating it. First of all, some vocab. There isn't too much in this section, which is something of an indicator about the nature of how it's all working. The first word you might need that you should recognise, but in case you don't, is genao. This is repeated a number of times in the first couple of verses and means be born. Anything with that gen root is likely to have something to do with being born. Then you've got barus, an unusual adjective from the New Testament, in verse 3, meaning heavy or burdensome, it's often translated as here. The verb nikao, which is repeated several times, meaning I conquer, followed quickly by the noun niker, which is victory, giving us Nike sandals, trainers. Nikao is repeated again in the next verse, etc. You see these things come up again and again and again. In the next section, you then get hudor and hyma, two third declension words with the genitive hudatos and hymatos as when you first meet them, meaning water and blood. And those are repeated several times over the next couple of verses. For this section, this is the only very unusual vocab you're going to need. Other words that get repeated a lot are the different parts of martyreo, as in the participle martyruntes, meaning bear witness. That's brought up a number of times just in those verses 6, 7, 8, and 9. With the noun associated with martyria, meaning the actual witness or testimony. After that, it's structured quite simply in terms you will already recognise. So thinking about some of the structure, you've got your pas hopisteon. You should be getting used to seeing this kind of phrasing in this text. Pas ho agapon, hopisteon, togenemenon, top morturun, hui marturuntes, homer hopisteon, homer pisteon, and further down, ho echon, homer echon. This phrasing of the one who, and an article with a participle giving you the person who does it, is something you've seen again and again and again, and is very common again in this section of the text. You've also got phrases you've seen, such as unusual phrases you've seen, such as the en tutor in verse 4, giving you your, for this reason, logical move on. And this is another very rhetorically structured text. One of the things you might notice as part of that rhetorical structure this time is the number of times the word for this is used. You've got a whole bunch of them going all the way through the text. Hauter, and then the next section, hutos, hauter, and then again, hauter. Notice they've all got rough breathings. It's hauter, not outer, and therefore not autu, because that's autu with a negative breathing. This high rhetorical structure is also marked by the number of times you see hoti in this text, because hoti here is providing a number of functions, quite often almost acting as a colon to introduce the explanation for the previous phrase. So you've got hoti, two in those first sections, but then when you get to the next section, it really ramps up. Hoti, hoti, hoti. Hoti, 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 and then, yeah. So you can see at a glance how explanatory and structured this text is, that there's an awful lot of becauses and that's linking it all together. This is another set of syllogisms. You've also got a couple of subjunctive uses introducing different kinds of clauses. You have hotan and agapormen, giving you an indefinite clause whenever we love God, and hina teromen, purpose, so that we might keep his commandments. You've also got slightly unusual grammatical features, like comparatives in this section. So I'll go back to an unusual comparative sign. So Maidstone in verse 9. My pen has crashed. In verse 9, you'll see the word Maidstone. That means greater. Is not terribly common in the New Testament and it's worth keeping an eye on. So if you break this down, it's a series of short phrases that you've seen an awful lot of. Everyone who does this does that. A few of those are variations. So you see the explanatory, this is the love of God in verse 3. That, explanation through the hina. Or in verse 5, tis is, who, tis to estin, who is the conqueror of the world, except. So it's couched as a question this time, rather than an explanation and a statement. And you also see in verse 9, it's couched as a conditional this time, if X, Y, Z. So there are different strategies in here, different clauses breaking up your text, but you still have a series of statements explaining each other, repeating vocab and picking it up. Hopefully that introduction has given you a little bit about the architecture of it. Look at the streamlined version where that architecture has been unravelled somewhat in order to make it a bit easier to read. But just bear in mind quite how well structured this is when you're reading it, because that allows it to flow in your head, even if sometimes it makes it a little harder to translate.